All right, guys, we are going to read a story together today. It is called My Big Brother Johnny Caw, and it's in our Wonders Reading and Writing Workshop book. So, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pull up that book. So, we're in Wonders right now. We're going to go to Resources and see it says Reading Writing Workshop. That's the book we're going to grab. Okay, so I went and I opened up that resource, and then the story we're going to read today is on page 324. So down here, I'm going to type that page. And here is the story that we're going to read. Okay? So if you notice, when we are reading in Wonders, there are these little icons where we can click on and it'll read parts of the book out loud. Because I'm doing this with you today, I'm going to read it. But when you're doing these by yourself in the future, you can click that and it'll actually read to you and you can follow along. So we are talking about tall tales this week. One of the tall tales we read in class before we went on this hiatus, and that was Apples to Oregon. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to read My Big Brother Johnny Caw, and we're going to think about a couple of the things that were discussed in the slideshow. So I want you, while we read, to be thinking with me about what kinds of hyperbole happen in this story that would point to, that would be good evidence to suggest that this is a tall tale. We also are going to keep our eyes peeled for any sort of homophones. And also we're going to look for examples of cause and effect. So just thinking about what makes this story a tall tale, and then a couple other things. So I'm looking at the picture and I'm thinking about the title. And there's this girl and she's yelling, "Wake up," into this boy's face. She's like standing on his hand and I see his feet sticking out of the window. I feel like this boy is like huge, and look, there's like a chicken on his toe right there. So maybe Johnny Caw's like this huge kid, like not a regular sized person. I was just a tadpole of a girl when my family decided to leave the crowded city behind. My daddy said, "There are territories out west with wide open spaces. The Caw family needs room to grow." So just before I keep going, I'm noticing that this story is being told by the girl in the picture. I like that phrase, "I was just a tadpole of a girl." So that means she's young, right? Because a tadpole is a young frog. So this also reminds me about what we're learning in social studies. They're going west to wide open spaces. He was mostly talking about my big brother. At 15, Johnny had grown so tall that when he stretched out in bed at night, his head hung out the front door and his feet hung out the back door all the way into the chicken coop, where the hens laid eggs in it between his toes. So I know that's hyperbole, right? Like, no one can grow that big and chickens can't lay eggs between people's toes. So kind of reinforces my prediction that this kid is huge, right? They definitely need more room for the Caw family if they have a son that large. Mama loaded up the wagon with our belongings, and Daddy hitched up the oxen. We began to head west, but it wasn't long until Johnny hollered for everybody to stop. We'll never get there with these slow pokes pulling us," Johnny scoffed. He unhitched the team and put one ox on each shoulder. So this kid is putting an ox on his shoulder, one on each. So not only is he very large, but he apparently is very, very strong. Oh, I found a homophone too. Like let's see, up here, his head hung out the front door when he was laying in bed. So that's this kind of head, right, hanging out the front door. But over here, it says, we began to head west. So that's a different kind of head, isn't it? like when you head west, it's not this kind of head. Head west means go west. So we'll keep that one in the back of our mind. Mind you, don't let him topple off, Daddy hollered. So he's talking about the oxen not falling off his shoulders. Yes, sir, Johnny said. Tadpole can keep an eye on him. He picked me up and set me on top of his head, where I had to hang on to handfuls of Johnny's red hair to keep from falling off. Then Johnny grabbed hold of the hitch and began pulling the wagon. So that's kind of a funny picture I'm visualizing in my brain. He's got his sister, who apparently he calls Tadpole. I wonder if that's really her name, on his head, holding on to his red hair. And then he's got an oxen on each shoulder. And then he's pulling the wagon because he thought the oxen were doing it too slowly and they weren't getting there fast enough. He never did have much sense of direction. He pulled that wagon one way, then the other, faster and faster, digging out the biggest gully you ever saw. The next night, a big rain came and filled it up. I hear now that they call that crooked gully the Kaw River. So there is a river in, apparently, that exists called the Kaw River that was created by Johnny Kaw pulling this wagon, pulling it this way and that, like in a crooked way, not like a straight line. So that tells me the river must be kind of a winding river. It filled up, and that river was created by him. Sounds like a tall tale, right? It also kind of sounds like a pourquoi, too. Johnny pulled our wagon to a Kansas settlement where people were trying to figure out how to raise crops. Problem is these mountains, one settler said. They're in the way. Johnny said that was no problem. He saw a big cottonwood tree, used a saw to cut it down, and whittled it into a giant scythe. Next, he whacked the mountains off down near the ground, hauled them west, and piled them up in a big row. Today, folks call them the Rocky Mountains. So Johnny Kaw's responsible for creating the Rocky Mountains by cutting down the mountains in Kansas with a scythe. And you can kind of look at the picture of what a scythe looks like. It's like a hook tool people used to kind of basically cut wheat back in the old days, but he made one out of a tree because it needed to be pretty large to cut the mountaintop off, right? So he moved those out of Kansas, piled them up, made the Rocky Mountains. Everybody in Kansas was so happy with the nice flat land that they asked us to stay and homestead with them. We built a sod house and started planting wheat. So now that the land is flat in Kansas, people are going to start planting their crops. Oh, and I also have spied another homophone. I see saw, the biggest gully you ever saw. And down here, he used a saw to cut it down. So the saw up here is like you saw with your eyes, like the past tense of see. But this saw is a noun. It's a tool used to cut down trees. So, did you notice that one? I'm sure you did because you're good like that, right? Now one summer it was mighty dry. All of the wheat had started to shrivel up in the field. Our neighbors came and asked for Johnny's assistance. My crop has about withered away to nothing, one neighbor said. Without rain, we're done for. I've got an idea, said Johnny, looking up at some puffy clouds. He grabbed hold of his big hoe and commenced poking holes in the clouds. Down came the rain in buckets, and the wheat was saved. So that's kind of a tall tale thing for someone to be able to poke holes in a cloud and make rain come out. One morning at the riverbank, Mama was plunging our dirty clothes in the water to get them clean when a prospector rode up. We know what a prospector is. It's someone looking for gold, right? He said he was headed to California to find gold. Trouble is, he said, there's not one decent trail between here and there. Mama said, let me talk to my son. Johnny was happy to help. For a week, he hiked back and forth to all kinds of places, dragging his giant bags of wheat everywhere, clearing trails of trees, brush, and boulders. The Gold Rush folks were tickled to find good, clear paths that they named the Oregon Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, and the Chisholm Trail. I think in social studies we learned about some of those trails, right? Do you think those were created by a big, giant kid dragging bags of wheat for the Gold Rush guys, for the prospectors? Or does that sound like a tall tale? I'm sure glad our family ended up in Kansas. Our neighbors tell us that this is a bad place for twisters, but so far we haven't seen one. I can't wait though. Johnny plans to lasso that twister and ride it like a bucking bronco, and he's promised his little sister a ride. So at the end, they talk about the potential for another tall tale moment where a twister or a tornado comes along and he's able to get a rope around it and ride it like a bronco, like a rodeo. So that is the story of Johnny Caw, told by his little sister, who we know as Tadpole. We were talking about ways that there was hyperbole being used, like things that could not actually really happen. A little bit of a pourquoi element to it, right? Explaining where the Rocky Mountains came from, where the Caw River, how that was made, how these trails to California were created. These are not actually true, but it's kind of fun. Thinking that this big hero guy who's doing all this, who's helping a lot of people out, is responsible for making life a little bit easier and better for people. So what you're going to do now, as we finished, is there are some questions for you to answer. So each day in reading, at the end of whatever reading we do or whatever reading you are assigned, you're going to go into the reading questions document for Tall Tales, and you're just going to answer a couple questions each day. So let's go. I'm going to pause actually this video so you don't have to wait for me to get it, but I'm going to go ahead and go into those questions, and we'll talk about them together in a minute. Okay, so what I did is I went to Google Classroom and I pulled up the Tall Tales reading questions. I made a copy for myself so that I don't end up writing on yours, but everybody should have their name, Tall Tale reading questions document. So first thing I want you to do is make sure you put your name right here. Because some people are forgetting about that part. And then we're going to answer these questions, okay? So for Monday, our first question is, what is a tall tale? So if I think back to the slideshow that we looked at, a tall tale is a type of folktale that features a larger than life hero and hyperbole. So remember, a larger than life hero is someone that is able to do these amazing, impossible things. Hyperbole is like exaggeration for the purpose of humor or getting a point across, right? Describe one event from the story, My Big Brother Johnny Caw, that contains hyperbole, something exaggerated, right? So I think about the first example about him becoming so big that his head hangs out the front. I'm going to go back to the text. I'm not going to switch though, but I got that tab open right there. So I can go back to the text in that tab if I'm doing this question and I want to, and I could just kind of look at that again. One example of hyperbole from the story is that at 15 years old, Johnny Caw was so tall that when he stretched out in bed, his head hung out the front door and his feet went out the back door. So that's an exaggeration of how big someone can possibly be, right? That's not possible. So a homograph from the story, My Big Brother Johnny Caw, and explain what makes that word a homograph. So again, I pointed out a couple when we were reading. One was head and one was saw. Let's do saw. So one example of a homograph from the story is saw. In one sentence, the word saw is used to describe something you were able to see with your eyes. In another sentence, the word saw was used to describe a type of tool that is used to cut down trees. So my example of a homograph is saw. I explained 2 different meanings of saw that I found in the book. So I'm done with that question. Question number 4. Using the events from my big brother Johnny K. That should be Ka, huh? Typo, Masenko. Complete the cause and effect sentence. Okay, so Johnny Ka used a hoe to poke holes in the clouds because. So whenever I see the word because, I know the cause is, this is kind of a flipped around sentence. The cause comes after the word because. So the effect is right here, right? So the effect is he poked holes in the clouds. What caused him to do that? So that's kind of tricky because if I did that the wrong way and I thought this was the cause and the effect of him poking holes was that it began to rain, right? But if I said Johnny used a hoe to poke holes in the clouds because it began to rain, that totally doesn't make sense. So we have to be careful and think about the meaning of our sentences when we do cause and effect, because sometimes it can actually be phrased as effect and then cause, the opposite, right? Like in this case. So hopefully that made sense. But this is actually a cause and effect sentence that is a effect and a cause sentence. So he used a hoe to poke holes in the clouds because people were complaining that their crops were dying from not getting any rain. So what caused him to poke holes in the clouds was people worried about their crops. One of the things I like to do when I do my questions, I don't know if you guys are interested, I like to highlight my answers just so they stand out from the questions. So I'm going to do that. So these are my answers. You don't need to delete the questions. I know some people have been doing that. You can just leave the question right there and then write your answer underneath. I would actually recommend not deleting questions just in case you forget what the question was. If you've already deleted it, that's really hard to go back, right? So anyways, what I did was I just highlighted my answers to these questions, and I can see that I've answered each one using complete sentences, right? So I'm done for the day. What I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to watch the video and I'm going to read another story with Miss Hanko, and then I'm going to answer these Tuesday questions. So what I want you guys to do right now is I want you to go fill out the Monday question answers, remembering what we just did here. Okay? All right. Peace out.